Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. This is your first time tuning into the show. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. With just over a week to go before Chargers training camp, Dan, this is where the cream, as Macho Man Randy Savage would say, the cream rises to the top, man. It's that time of training camp. We've all been missing football. We're all just dying for it to get back. And we could think of nothing better than for today. We're going to take a deep dive into the defense and returning to Chargers Unleashed, special guest Trevor McCue, who last came on the show shortly after Jim Harbaugh was hired and started talking about how Jim Harbaugh is going to change the culture and this is going to happen and this is going to happen and this is what to watch out for defensively and this is how he's going to want to run his offense. And Trevor just absolutely nailed virtually everything. Everything that he says, in short, over the past few months is basically the culture shift that is taking place right now in Los Angeles. So very happy to welcome Trevor McCue back to the show.
I'm fortunate Jim Harbaugh is consistent and reliable and made me look very, very, very smart. But yeah, I want you guys to know that currently my PlayStation 5 has College Football 25 downloaded and ready to play.
Let's go.
And I'm still here with you. So that's how that's how much I like you guys, apparently.
Got a chance to fit us into your busy schedule, I see.
Yeah. So you owe me, I guess.
But. Yes, we owe you. Michigan rivals Trevor McCue gives us the time away from NCAA 25. And Jake said it. It was pretty miraculous because last time we had you on, Jesse Minter was kind of just assumed, but that was not official. None of the other coaching staff was official other than Jim Harbaugh. The GM has yet to be announced. So now everything is solidified. So we have kind of the Harbaugh ties everywhere. Everyone from Michigan came west, which we'll talk to about in a second here. We'll talk about kind of how this Chargers defense is going to look versus what Michigan had and look at some of the maybe Chargers similarities. And go into some of the coaching impacts and some of the things that we might see from the likes of Steve Clinkscale, Jesse Minter, Ben Herbert, and company. But, Trevor, let's just kind of start this with just the overall post-Jim Harbaugh life from the Michigan side, and then kind of what you saw maybe as things had progressed over as piece after piece after piece of that staff came west to LA.
Yeah, we were talking about it. It's so weird that it's been that long. It didn't feel like that was the moment that we were in then. But yeah, look, as it's happening, it's obviously tough for that is.
Right. It still hurts, doesn't it?
I'm sorry. For those just listening, the visual that came up on the screen is one of Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter, and Ben Herbert.
Just so Trevor knows, Dan created the slides. I did not.
No, when you think you've moved on from your girlfriend and then you're scrolling Facebook and she posts a picture with her new boyfriend and that sting comes back again. Yeah. No, look, it's always hardest when it's happening and people don't like change, right? So there was a lot of unknown. And as these things are happening, it's tough for Michigan fans. And you don't know what Sharon Moore is doing in the background, right? That's the other piece of it. So you're waiting for this news to come. And then unfortunately, during his hiring process, there was some bad news that came out. We had his first defensive line coach got terminated for getting a DUI the day before spring practice started. Denard Robinson, a Michigan legend, also had a DUI and was let go. So there was some around the program, right? But as time has gone on, things get back to normal, right? And you see more of the new staff. You get to know the new guys. It's exciting. And Michigan football recruiting in the last couple of months has really picked up. And a lot of the things that Sharon Moore said he was going to do in terms of walking that line of the continuity of the culture of success built under Jim Harbaugh, but also the program, how it was going to change and adapt with his fingerprints. We're seeing this come to fruition now, so fans are a little bit more excited. And look, they're talking about who's going to be the quarterback in the fall and, can they replace player X or whatever? So things have kind of moved on. I mean, people still love Jim Harbaugh, but again, like I told you on the last show, he came, he conquered. He did what he said he was going to do, and a lot of people are hoping he does well in the NFL. So
yeah, and I think that the part for Chargers fans that I think it's hard sometimes to capture is just how much of the Michigan nucleus, from a staff perspective, came to this Chargers team. And you know firsthand probably more than anybody that talks Chargers because you lived Michigan life for years. But whether it's Jesse Minter or Steve Klingscale or the defensive line coach or Ben Herbert or Jim Harbaugh or members of the staff, just tell us about like the overall like impact that you think either maybe some of those specifically or just as a whole, what that is bringing to this Chargers team.
Yeah. So defensively, he has the entire defense, right? So the only coach who technically hasn't joined him in LA was Chris Partridge, who was let go during the whole, sign stealing allegation piece. I was a little surprised he didn't join Jim. Actually, I can't remember. Was it Seattle? He might have ended up with Mike McDonald. I don't remember now, to be honest. But and then obviously his son Jay went to Seattle with Mike McDonald as well, who was his defensive coordinator in 21, which isn't a huge surprise. Jay was a good opportunity for him to get his feet wet and do something outside of his dad's shadow, if you will. So wasn't shocked by that. But look, defensive coordinator, defensive line coach, and cornerback coach. And arguably, Klingscale and Elston at the time were viewed as the two best recruiters as well, which, for people that are maybe way more NFL fans than college, recruiting is the lifeblood, right? It's the most important thing a position coach can do in some ways, right? And I think that was a big motivating factor too for why Elston and Klink ultimately decided to move on. Elston and Klink, as good as they are as recruiters, are excellent technique coaches. They're really good coaches.
Well, that's music to my ears. Good Lord.
Yeah, we can get into that too. Yeah. There's a lot of college coaches. I think Dan Lanning in Oregon even literally said, like, nobody cares about whatever new idea you have. Can you recruit? Right. That's what a lot of this stuff is with young position coaches in college, especially in this NIL era. That's all they care about. And for anybody like Elston or Klink, who's been around college football for a long time, they don't love this new world of college football. And the idea of more money, less work, and living in Southern California probably didn't sound like a bad move, right? So, look, the defense changed, but it also kind of stayed the same. Wink Martindale, the Ravens' old defensive coordinator, the OG of this defense, as he calls himself, was hired. They've hired some position coaches that are just exactly what Sherrone Moore was going to bring, this new energy, these folks that like this newer modern college football in this era of recruiting. And they've won fans over, but that's the big change. The offensive staff largely stayed the same. Not terribly shocking because Moore was made head coach and Kirk Campbell stayed. But yeah, behind the scenes, I mean, you're talking about the recruiting department. A lot of guys and gals left, and a lot of the people that do the hard work that nobody knows about, which I think is probably pretty essential to a culture and the machine and how it grinds, right? Like Harbaugh took anybody he trusted that was willing to make the move. So on the flip side of that, Moore was looking to make a bunch of changes with the recruiting department anyway. So I don't think, not that those people were going to be let go or anything, but it was just kind of a clean slate. So I don't think that was as bad or detrimental to Michigan as losing Jesse Minter and, some of those guys. But honestly, that probably would have been anticipated. We talked about that too. If Harbaugh hadn't left, Minter was going somewhere. The dude was the most coveted DC. So yeah, fresh faces, but still kind of the same. It's eerily similar. It's weird.
I want to give context to everybody as far as what this show is going to be about and kind of how it's spurned, because obviously Trevor's just so deep in his Michigan knowledge. And so I messaged him last week because I was just curious as we're getting closer to training camp. And, we pretty much know what Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman are going to be doing on the offensive side of the football. And that's been talked about so much here over the last few months. So I messaged out to Trevor to ask him, like, where do you see like how Jesse Minter is really going to deploy this defense? And with the talent that Michigan had last year, winning a national championship, the defense was just ridiculous at all three levels of the ball last year. So I was just asking him, like, where do you see X player on the Chargers fitting into a comparison to where a Michigan player was, whether it be Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, and kind of line that up for me. And not only does he give me an answer, he just goes full X's and O's into it. And I said to myself in my head, I'm like, we have to just talk about this in a broader scale.
I was so excited when you asked me, I couldn't help myself.
It was so good just because Trevor loves talking football as much as the next person. And the way that he broke it down, I'm just like, oh my God, I just got my ass put in a chair in the middle of a film room. And here is Trevor just giving me a school board lesson on it. So yeah, I wanted to start off with this. So as Dan brings up here, the defensive front, we want to break this down at every level of the defense. And so through our conversation, Trevor, as it relates to this defensive front, talking about the interior defensive linemen, the edge players, how do you see this defensive line being deployed? Because with the Chargers, it's been a lot of ebbs and flows, a lot of changes over the last few years, and unfortunately, they just have not been able to get the production out of their interior guys. Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson didn't end up working out. Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Thule just haven't been able to stay on the field long enough to play as a trio together. But everything that Jesse Minter has talked about since he has gotten the position with the Chargers is that he wants to get after the quarterbacks. He loves bringing blitzes. But I am curious to know how the interior of this defensive line is going to work, because Jim Harbaugh has definitely lauded up a few players on this team, namely Scott Matlock. So if you were to draw the depth chart of the Chargers as it stands at the edge and interior defensive lineman position related to what Jesse Minter was deploying at Michigan, how would you see it play out?
Yes. So maybe I should quiz you guys first. I brought this up on the last show. Do you remember Jesse Minter's 4 pillars?
Block destruction.
Attaboy.
You put me on the spot. I don't remember the 4. What were they?
Block destruction's good. Another one similar, ball disruption, right?
Was there communication?
Obnoxious communication.
Yep. See, I'm there.
And then what did every little league coach ask for? Effort.
Always effort.
Yeah. So when it comes to the defensive front, right, that's the key. Block destruction, shedding your blocks, right, and ball disruption, whether that's getting in the backfield and impacting the run game, running lanes, or whether it's generating pass rush, right? And, one thing I told you too, it's awesome to have this conversation and see where guys could fit, right? But the Minter defensive scheme is almost more about results than it is the scheme itself, right? They will adapt to the strengths and weaknesses of the team. So having a Mason Graham, who you have pictured there, is going to be the best defensive tackle in the country this year, and a Kenneth Grant, who's 3rd or 4th best defensive tackle, right? An absolute beast. We talked about him. I think he'll be Bruce Feldman's number 1 freak, whatever. Having those 2 guys is a luxury and not a normal thing. So if you have somebody like a Mason Graham who can generate pass rush from the interior, that's massive, because now I can do the thing I love doing the most if I'm Jesse Minter, which is disguise coverages and disguise blitzes, right? Blitzes doesn't necessarily mean sending more than 4. It just means maybe I'm sending the guy you don't think I'm going to, and I'm dropping another guy back in coverage, right? And I'm messing with the quarterback as much as I can. So in the 3 DT front, you have a true nose tackle, you have a defensive tackle, and then that Chris Jenkins defensive end type guy, which we went back and forth on Matlock. He seems to be, he's versatile, right? And that's what they want in this defense. That's
a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. They want these guys that necessarily don't fit in a hole, because they can take advantage of that versatility. And then you as an opponent don't really know how to game plan for that. Right. And, I know, you mentioned Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa too. Those guys are, Harbaugh talked about him right when he was hired, right? Those are guys he's excited to have. Look at you. There it is. You even had the slide made and you couldn't remember.
I know.
I think this was from the previous show.
Oh, dug it up. Even better. So
we got receipts. We got receipts.
So, and I told Jake at the time too, in some ways, as you're evaluating this, looking at what the Ravens do could be just as comparable too. Obviously, just leaving Michigan and having the similar players, right? I don't want to butcher his name. Agbonia, how do you say it?
Tito
93?
Boga. Tito
Okay.
Boga.
All right. That's your 3 technique guy. I think that can, move around quite a bit like a Mason Graham did and play multiple spots. Morgan Fox was the other guy we talked about in that versatile role. And then the name I called out, if I remember correctly, the most Justin
Bogby.
Thank you. My I don't do well with names that are
your Chargers lingo is not as hip as your Michigan lingo, but that's for good reason.
No, that's Michigan lingo too. It's not dyslexia, but man, when last names aren't like a certain structure, when
they're not spelled or they're not announced phonetically. Yeah.
I get picked on a lot because I pronounce Sharon Moore's name wrong. I say Sharon. And it's definitely Sharon, and I know it's Sharon, but if I'm looking at it in a certain context, I say it wrong, so I don't want to butcher it. But
I will say, so don't feel bad because there's a lot of back and forth with a Chargers player, Kamani Vidal or Vidal, depending on who you are and how it's pronounced. Same thing. People get heat and splack if they're saying it one way or the other. So you're not alone.
Yeah,
Trevor, you're not alone.
Oh, thank you. But anyway, when I saw him drafted, I was just like, obvious fit. Right, just obvious fit. And
fit as what?
In terms of, if you looked at his draft profile going into that draft, what were people saying? I'm not really sure if he's going to be the 4-3D or can he play this role, and he might be undersized here, but he does this well. When NFL scouts are picking apart a guy as like a tweener and they don't know where he's going to fit,
say tweener.
He's going to fit in the Jesse Minter and Jim Harbaugh scheme.
And that's a Morgan Fox as well. That's kind of
absolutely. Give me a tweener. And part of that is I just got value. I got him in the 4th round, right? I got him in the 4th round, probably a 2nd round talent. And if I want to mold him, like here's my tweener status and I want him over here or over here, guess what I've got? Ben Herbert, right? The greatest strength and conditioning coach in college football, just an absolute madman, right? So I've talked about Mason Graham and Kenneth Graham. Mason Graham was considered underrated and kind of sluggish coming out of California, right? And it was like, I don't know if he can really stand up in the middle, right? Kenneth Grant was fat, way overweight, right? And now they're the best defensive tackle duo in college football, and that's Ben Herbert. And it's his training and his strength and conditioning. So
no, one thing what's interesting, and Jake kind of alluded to it before, is the Chargers team feels like they were very edge heavy in years past. Like the only production they ever really got from a pressure perspective seemingly came from the edge. Morgan Fox was like the one guy who did it because he was the one guy who came interior oftentimes. But I want to talk about that, but Jake, before we get to that, let's talk about our friends. Let's pay the bills.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline is still your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right up to the top fights of the UFC and MMA and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get it on the game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today and get in on the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit for up to $250. Bet online, the game starts here.
So I think, and maybe this is a complicated way of asking this, but Chargers fans are used to seeing the defensive line look a certain way over the last few years in this last defense. And I don't necessarily think physicality has been the thing that they've seen, if we're being honest. And this defensive front seems to be getting built differently, where you're having a lot more beef, if you will, and there's more emphasis on kind of the interior getting production. Is the defensive line now with Mike Elson and with some of these guys that were drafted and the Jesse Minter defense, is that going to change what it looks like on Sundays from a defensive line perspective? Because they still have Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Thule.
Yeah, I mean, Khalil Mack especially, I mean, I know he's not the same guy he was, 5, 6, 7 years ago or whatever, but he is somebody absolutely built to thrive in this defense. And we know that because where he was his best with the Chicago Bears with Vic Fangio, which if you want to connect the line of the Harbaugh coaching tree and whatever, Vic Fangio was a defensive coordinator with Jim Harbaugh at Stanford and then San Francisco as well. And that scheme, Vic and Wink, all kind of traces back to Western Kentucky when Jack Harbaugh was there in the early 2000s. Okay, so that 3-4 over, or the two, like I said, you can call it 2-4-5. There's so many different ways you can call this defense, but your standing edge player with defensive tackles that can consume blocks and take on double teams is where Khalil Mack will absolutely eat, right? And Joey Bosa was a top 5 pick for a reason as well, more of a standard defensive end. You could argue that you could see times where he lines up like the defensive end in a 3-4, that Chris Jenkins role. He could potentially be that guy that moves in. If you want to think about Aiden Hutchinson, right? Obviously having a really good start to his career in Detroit, was instrumental to what Michigan did in 2021. Most sacks in Michigan football history in a season came from Aiden Hutchinson. He was a standing edge. He was a hand in the dirt 4-3 defensive end. He lined up as a defensive tackle at times. That could be something you see from a guy like Bosa. Again, that versatility and being able to move those guys around. And then, some of the other players getting some rotation and depth in there. But yeah, I would expect physicality to increase and the players to be excited about it, right? I don't think people realize a lot that
I think that's already taken place.
I was going to say, Jake, you and I could talk
they're
about
already
that.
Excited.
I don't think
Trevor,
people
I'm telling you the difference in the offseason so far, and you probably know some of this stuff from your Jim Harbaugh days, but like some of the things they do during training or during camp and OTAs and all the kind of stuff, the drills and kind of like the fifth period and all the stuff they do afterwards, the players are eating this thing up.
Yeah.
And, it's jacking them up. Jake, you could talk to it just as much as I can. Like it's very different how it is being used now versus how it was before.
I think one of the things I told you last time too was, look, Harbaugh's going to come in with all these phrases, right? He'll have a slogan or a mantra for everything. And he's going to talk a lot, but doing it is where you get the buy-in, right? It's all words until players see it. So when he actually gets a chance to show what he's talking about and earn that buy-in, they buy in 100%, right? So that genuine and sincerity and meaning what you say, that's where that payoff comes from players.
Love that. Dan, let's move to the linebacker spot, because this one's obviously one we're really excited about. And I can tell you, Trevor, from Dan and I watching the draft together when Junior Colson was selected in the 3rd round, shouldn't even have still been there in the 3rd round, if we're being completely honest. But Dan put out a tweet, I want to say it was the day after, and said, this could be subjective and people can have their opinions on it all they want. But Dan's perspective was Junior Colson may be stepping into his rookie year with the most responsibility of any non-quarterback that's drafted this past season. And I thought about that, and I actually thought that makes sense, because Junior Colson's now coming into this with a leg up on everybody on that defense, because he's been basically birthed into that defense over the past several years in Michigan, knows exactly the scheme that Jesse Minter wants to run. And I know that they're not alluding to the fact that Junior Colson is going to have the third, the green dot or not. They're not necessarily giving it to him yet. But Dan and I fully believe that by the time that we get to week 1, that he's going to have that on the back of his helmet. So as it relates to what Junior Colson's going to bring, I want to know more just from you, because mirroring this with now Deion Henley and Denzel Perryman, how does Jesse Minter like to deploy his linebackers in this system?
Was that Henley in that picture, by the way?
Yes.
What a monster, my God. Jeez. Junior Colson's not a little boy, but holy cow next to that. Anyway, let me make this real creepy, right? So, look, Junior Colson, I remember, I don't remember if I talked to you after that tweet or remember, but I feel like we had a conversation about this when you said, I don't know. Anyway, I remember seeing that and thinking the same thing in terms of Colson's role, right? One of the pillars, obnoxious communication, right? So here's the guy that was the quarterback for the defense for the last 2 years at Michigan. Like you said, already has a leg up with the scheme being put in with the Chargers, comes into that role. I think you could fully expect him to take that on, and that's a huge role to take on, right? Calling out things and making sure people are in the right position and such. And look, here's the other thing about it. The character of Junior Colson, coming from another country and some difficult situations and getting to where he is and that story, everyone can have different ways of having that adversity to overcome in that challenging story, but his is unique and special. And toughness. I don't know if there's guys much tougher than Junior Colson, right? So Junior Colson, I just did my all Harbaugh era Michigan team and picked the top players from the Harbaugh era. And he was one of the linebackers, which is nobody had more tackles while Jim Harbaugh was at Michigan than Junior Colson. The last 2 years, he was the team's leading tackler. And the last 2 years, he hasn't been banged up. He's had serious injuries. Okay. So about the clubs, 2 broken hands at one point, and then it was 1.5. He had a mesh thing. Yeah, he played with 2 clubs and led the team in tackling. I don't know if a lot of people know, 2022, he played with a near broken foot all year.
Good Lord.
The guy is just tough. Absolutely tough. So, and he's just really, really improved in all parts of the game. He's a great tackler. He's incredibly good at trapping and finding running lanes. He's gotten a lot better at dropping back in coverage. That was something he got picked on a little bit during 2022. They had some teams kind of go after him. He's really improved in that element. But yeah, he's just, I'm sure you saw the video when Jim called him.
Oh yeah.
Right. He is just a smart, tough, well-rounded, humble dude. And he's a Jim Harbaugh guy. That's just all it is. He's a Jim Harbaugh guy. So
what's the linebacker duo? Or if you want to, spread it out to, because Denzel Perryman is also there, who's a hit stick waiting to happen. What does the linebacker group look like on Saturdays for you, Sundays now in the NFL?
Yeah, so you've got there again. It gets kind of tricky with how X and O's you want to be, because they're both technically inside linebackers.
Yep.
Right, and you have a Mike and a Will, which is almost more name only. As much as Junior Colson was technically the Mike and what you think of as a middle linebacker last year, it doesn't really matter. He moves around, he does different things. Same thing with a Michael Barrett, who was the Will last year, right? So you're going to have your strong side linebacker, the guy that's bigger and trying to impact, maybe, whoever's more likely to guard tight ends in coverage, right? That's going to be a piece of it as well. But I would imagine, especially pairing with who you have at edge, you're going to see linebackers get set on blitzes. Colson, in terms of production, although limited, was Michigan's best pass rusher at times in terms of the amount of pressure he could generate when sent. It was 35% or something like that. They just hardly sent him, right? So and that was because they had Aiden Hutchinson, Ajabo, and some these other guys throughout the years, right? So again, it's a matter of taking advantage. So they're going to have to be really good in coverage. That's just part of the scheme as well. But yeah, but what good in coverage also means too is preventing that. That's the other thing you got to get used to too. You're going to give up yards. Really good players are going to do good things against you. They're not going to score, right? And they're not going to get huge yards after the catch. When Michigan lost, the only big game they lost in 3 years under Harbaugh, the playoff game against TCU in 2022, missed tackles, gave up big plays. And that's why they lost, because they don't do that, right? So Junior Colson at times would give up a 60 or 70% completion ratio with an average of 1.2 yards after the catch, right? So I'll let you catch it in front of me. I don't care. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah, live to die another day kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
between the 20s, I'm not going to try. And that was the big difference between the Don Brown defense, who was the defensive coordinator prior to the switch to McDonald and Minter. Brown wanted to shut you down. Don't give him an inch, right? But there's a risk reward associated with that where you can shut them down 80% of the time, but then the other 20, they're getting big plays on you, right? So that's what it's about. You can give up receptions. You've got Patrick Mahomes in your division.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen, right? Don't let him extend the play so much that he gets a touchdown. Let him run around a little bit. Okay. Who cares? Don't let him score, right? And that's what it is too, is it's clamping down once you get closer to the red zone and inside the red zone, and then forcing turnovers. And that's a big part of Clink coming too. Clink scale is all technique, incredible technique. I don't have it up. My Mike Sainer still, if you've seen it, Mike Sainer still Ohio State 2022, the tip ball in the end zone against Kate Stover. That's Clink scale. They run those drills in practice, right? Like when they make these big plays, almost every single time after the game, we would ask the player, hey, where'd that come from? Clink, right? And the transition from 2022 to 23, they didn't have a lot of turnovers in 22. They felt really good about where they were technique and scheme-wise, really focused on turnovers in 23. They were second in the country in turnover margin last year.
This was probably the one group that I was really excited to get your perspective on, just because the Chargers secondary over the past several years has been big disappointment. You go through the JC Jackson debacle. Mike Davis has another down year last year when you were hoping to kind of rekindle the 2022 season that he had. Didn't come to fruition. Asante Samuel Jr. is still coming into his own. You go out and you get Christian Fulton that you're hoping is going to be a reclamation project. You still go out and you draft 2 corners and Cam Hart and Tarheeb Still. So you're still trying to rebuild the secondary with still Derwin James being your leader. And now to come off of a defense specifically coached by Steve Clinkscale, who had Mike Sanders-Still and Will Johnson at the helm to coach. When I listened to Steve Clinkscale's press conference, it's probably been one of the biggest resounding messages that's been sent by any assistant coach thus far. When he was asked how is he going to rotate certain cornerbacks, and basically what he came out and he said, I want every single one of them to be able to play inside and outside. Mm-hmm. I want them to be so versatile for not only just the injury impact that may end up coming down the road, but he's like, I want them to know everything about the defense. Even if they're not playing that position, I want them to know everything. And so that's why I was so excited to talk to you about this as it relates to Clinkscale and what he did in Michigan. And then now to see how he's going to take that coaching acumen and bring it to the Chargers.
I mean, I'm not shocked that is 100% Steve Clinkscale, man. So, and you see it pay off, right? Mike Sanders-Still, you bring him up. That's a former wide receiver that they had depth chart issues at corner. And they're like, hey, you want to go back to defense? He played defense in high school. Okay, sure. And he becomes one of the best corners in Michigan history, one of the best football players in Michigan history. I mean, just an absolute legend. And you just brought it up. He could play anywhere on the defense. The other incredibly high-ranking pass rusher on the team, they didn't do it often, Mike Sanders-Still, when they sent him on nickel blitzes, right? He could line up as a corner. He could play safety. And not only that, he taught everyone on the team, every single corner that came into this program and said, hey, how are things going? You know, who are you learning from? Uncle Mike, right? That leadership. And that's such a huge piece of it. So, you know, I know the current nickel. I'm trying not to pull up the depth chart.
There's a couple, and I think there's a big camp battle, I think, brewing here because
Taylor was the guy I wanted to narrow down.
Jazeer Taylor, and then kind of the Tarheeb Still coming up from college.
So Taylor strikes me as the kind of perfect Mikey fit because they can find that little chip on his shoulder, that thing in him about being called undersized, right? Uh-huh. A former captain in college, right? I can see a guy they think can play nickel and can play outside, right? When Will Johnson got hurt late in the Ohio State game, in years past, that game would have been over. That is your lockdown outside corner, Will Johnson, going to be the best corner in college football this year. Mike Sanders-Still moved to outside corner, and Jaden McBurrows came off the bench, moved into nickel, and here we go. right? And then when a game-sealing interception needed to happen, safety Rod Moore, right? And I think that's another piece of it. And I'll tell you this too, the way you look at secondary, corner, and safety, that line's going to get blurry. It's going to get real blurry. Derwin James is going to be a factor in coverage. He's going to blitz. He's going to be a part of the run game. They are going to love him, right? And when you talk about secondary, I don't think you can exclude him because of the way they're going to be versatile. A guy like Fulton, you mentioned as well, I think is a really good signing. And we've talked about Harbaugh loving those NFL bloodlines. When he saw Samuel Jr., okay, he's telling him, look, I know what your daddy did, right? So I think the pieces are there. And the combination of Minter and Klink, improvement will definitely be seen this year. What level they get to, I mean, we'll have to see. But I think there's going to be improvement for sure.
So this is one, and Jake and I had talked about this in years past, and I'm curious to kind of get your take, because I think, to your point, Jake, the secondary is the one for me that I have most outstanding questions and concerns. And part of that is because of the scars of the last few years, and part of that is just the unknown. And we know how good Jesse Minter is. We've heard, Mike Elson talk about how incredible he is at seeing the back end of the defense and how well he is at adapting and adjusting game to game.
Yes.
And you hear about the technique with clean scale and all of that. And so it's hard not to be bought into the coaching staff and the bump that they can give the players. But that's a lot of faith to be put in the coaching staff when the roster includes guys who are like reclamation projects, or, there is no current bona fide shut down outside corner, or there are camp battles still happening, or rookies. And so that blurred line of safety to corner, outside, inside, game to game, down to down, series to series, like there seems to be a lot there. And Jesse Minter talked about, and Cleanscale talked about this team kind of only learning like brick by brick. Like, we're not going to add something else to your table until you master this thing. Like, how much of that do you see being like that blurred lines, to your point, game to game versus like series to series, play to play? Because what we saw, and this is my concern, last year especially, but years past, it felt like people were all over the place, and it was like almost overcomplicated. They were just fried, and it was breakdown central. Like, how is that different? What should we expect with that?
Yeah, because you hear like, hey, we want you to know all of these things and be super versatile and be able to do a lot. So it feels like you're asking a lot of the players, but that's not necessarily true. You're going to put them in places where they can succeed, right? And put them in places they're comfortable, right? It's not literally the playbook is bigger. It's not literally what I'm asking you to do is significantly more, per se, right? And it's one of those things too where, like, once it clicks, it just seems to click for guys, and they get better exponentially because of that comfort, right? And look, I'm talking about Will Johnson and Mason Graham and these guys that were calling stars, and Aiden Hutchinson, right? But there was a time this was called the no star defense, right? Especially in 2022 when Hutch left. The biggest question was, who's going to replace Aiden Hutchinson? There's nobody on this roster like him. Right. And they took an almost, I hate using it, but like an almost Moneyball like approach to the defense, where it's like, I don't have one player to replace Aiden Hutchinson. I've got three, and I can rotate, and this guy's good at this and this guy's good at that. And I'm going to take advantage of those things. And that's how we're going to deal with it. And you don't need I guess this is my point. You don't need the stars to be a successful defense. That's luxury. When you get those guys to that next level, you're even better now, right? Mm-hmm. The scheme is built to succeed with average or above average players. The guys, the misfit toys, right? The guys that were undersized, the tweeners, right? The guys that were only 3-star recruits, like
one of us,
right? Right? But that's just my point. Right? It's, we find your strengths, where it can fit in, where we can succeed. And man, if I get a defensive tackle that can pass rush, if I get a lockdown corner, if I get an edge that can get me double-digit sacks, Cool. Because now another player is going to succeed because of that guy, right? Strong is your weakest link, whatever. They didn't have a second corner last year. Into the summer, there was concern like they have nobody to play across from Will Johnson. They got a UMass transfer named Josh Wallace, who used to play for Don Brown. Everybody's like, oh, is this really going to work? You know, top 10 corner in the Big Ten. You know, so are you going to hit that elite level with guys right out the gate? No, but you can be better and you can still be really, really good with average or above average players.
I wanted to almost summarize this because now we've gone through it at all three levels. And just in general, as it relates to Jesse Minter here, because now you've kind of given us a little bit of an inside view as far as to say this is what the defensive line is going to look like, this is what the edge is going to look like, linebacker, secondary, what have you. Mike Elston said this, and I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember exactly what he said, but I think he said this during National Championship Week when he was talking about Jesse Minter. And in summarization, he basically had said, Jesse Minter is the most adaptive defensive coach that I've ever played with in my time of coaching. And Mike Elston's been in the coaching game for a long time. And I bring that up because defensively, when it comes to adapting, I don't think the Chargers knew what book to read in that circumstance, whether it was half to half, week to week. It just seemed like more of the same issues that they had to go off of. And we've seen the stats that Justin Herbert has had to deal with over the past 3 years and how much his defense has given up to opposing teams when it comes to the win-loss record. In summarization, I wanted to pick your brain on that. When it comes to situational football, what is it that Jesse Minter's bringing to the Chargers?
This one, I'm glad you brought it back up because Dan, you had mentioned the play-to-play half, that part. I didn't really answer that, so I'm glad you brought this up. I remember the last time we talked about this in a similar context, you guys got like chills because I was hyping up Jesse Minter so much. Half to half. The man in the second half is a literal genius. If you can be leading, tied, or within striking distance going into halftime, you are going to win more likely than not. Because this guy is just an absolute genius when it comes to making the little tweaks once he's seen what you're doing on the field. And look, that'll happen series to series too, right? And he can adjust to you adjusting and the chess match that occurs there. But I would recommend Chargers fans, I mean, you can find the full things on YouTube. If you haven't seen them, go watch Michigan versus Ohio State in 2022 and in 23, and go watch Michigan versus Alabama in the Rose Bowl last year. And you tell me at halftime, does it feel like Michigan is going to win those games and the defense is doing everything they need to do to win the game? And then watch the second half and just absolutely go ear to ear with what a madman Jesse Minter can be with those situational adjustments in game. I mean, even the game plan coming into games is always great.
Yeah.
But so are coaches on the other side, right?
Well, Jake said it too. Like, the problem with the Chargers was it's all good until you get punched in the mouth. And then when that happened, it kind of just fell.
Yeah.
And that seems like a halftime adjustment. All right, you got punched in the mouth. Now what?
Yeah. And it's that, and it's everything else. I mean, if you want to come full circle to all the phrases that Jim Harbaugh talks about and the idea of the cliche of playing 60 minutes, a full 60 minutes, it's not a cliche with a Jim Harbaugh football program. And you have the guy in Ben Herbert to build these dudes. I mean, there are games, Michigan fans, and I'll tell you what, Chargers, you're probably going to have this too. You might be bored during some of these games, and you might even be annoyed with the offense seemingly stalling out or not taking any big risks, or, just like, like this slow churn, right? In the fourth quarter, they will take over the game. They will. And they're going to wear the other team down. And that's how they win football games against Penn State. Here's another one if you want to bring it up. Michigan did not have the tackle play to compete against the pass rush of Penn State. JJ was a little banged up. They were struggling to throw the ball. They ran the ball 30 straight times in the second half. This is with Sherrone Moore on the sideline. And he doesn't do that without knowing Jim Harbaugh was happy back at the hotel room, right? He got suspended right before that game. He doesn't do that without the Harbaugh culture. That was a frustrating game, but they won. And at the end of the game, they broke them physically and mentally. They don't care how they get a W. They don't care about style points. They want to win, and they're going to win. And it might not be the prettiest thing. It might not be a bunch of big plays, but you're going to win divisions. You're going to win big games. You're hopefully going to win playoff games like that. That's what you want, right? So and Minter, yeah, he's all a part of it.
So two, I guess, maybe topics to kind of close this one out for me. And one is maybe expectations for this team this year. And two is the Ben Herbert effect. And since we had you on the show last, I've never seen it. The Chargers had a press conference where Ben Herbert was out there talking for like 30 minutes. And, you know, Jake and I were kind of talking about, like, it was like he was staring into our souls. And you're used to it, right? But
yeah,
so intense, but it was so engaging. And hearing him talk, I've never heard of like a performance hire get brought on at a press conference in the NFL, like, period. I've never seen it before. And, you know, he was highly coveted, so I get why he's doing it and giving him his, you know, claim to fame. But Ben Herbert was just interviewed recently at their new training facility, which I don't know if you heard, but they brand new state-of-the-art training facility.
It's a big reason Jim took that job too.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure Ben Herbert, same thing. This is like Disneyland, kid in the candy store. Talk to us about just like the Ben Herbert effect and where that is seen in real life on Sundays, Thursdays, and Mondays now, and what Chargers fans should or maybe should not expect.
I know people are listening and not watching, but I'm laughing because of the phone. He is such a madman, dude. Do you remember what I told you on the last show, where he walks into the room and he's assessing the risk at all times, like he's just always looking, dude.
The comparison that Jim made with Ben about him basically being Ben Affleck's character in The Accountant, where it's like he has his fork, he has his knife, but he only got one fork and one knife. I'm not.
We're already getting our Harbaughisms. It's so
after
good.
I listened to Ben Herbert's press conference, I went for a second workout. I felt about that big about myself physically.
Oh, literally,
I needed to go do something. Physically.
Literally, I went to the gym like an hour after that press conference. I was like, "Dang, yes, you're right. Fat mass down, lean mass up. Let's go."
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really what it is, though, right? He's inspiring, right? And we joke about he's a madman and how he looks and the weapons and whatever. He's also just really good at his job and understanding. And look, we talked about some of the back end guys, the dietary people, and some of those guys went to the Chargers as well, too, right? He's just really good at understanding what goes into a player's body and the type of workouts they need to do. And like, he's just a smart guy too, right? Jesse Minter is not the, scary looking guy that Herbert is, but he's really smart and he's good at the job. Herbert's the same way. He just also looks like the villain from a comic book, right? So, look, I told you when the thought of him first going there was interesting in some ways because in college, the strength and conditioning coach is like the head coach of the offseason, right? Players interact with them almost more than anyone, right? And there's a serious relationship there. And in the pros, everybody's got their own guys and things like that. But I think I figured Herbert would have a more expanded role, and he clearly does, right? And I think maybe the facility is probably a big piece of that too, right? In terms of bringing everything into one building and allowing Herbert to maybe take on a role that in other programs a guy like him wouldn't.
Totally.
But it's the same thing as Harbaugh, right? Phrases, talk, whatever, inaction, buy-in. And I'm sure that's what's happening is the players are seeing, like, because he's doing the workouts with them, right? Like,
Jim Harbaugh's doing it with them.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy.
Jim Harbaugh pushing sleds and everything.
Yes.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. So, but players love that stuff, dude. With Detroit here, the Lions have Dan Campbell. It's kind of a similar thing when he was hired. People are like, oh, this meathead, blah, blah, blah. He relates to players, and it's really hard to do in this era of the NFL, right? Yeah. I mean, it's with how much money has come into the sport, how much that matters. Trying to build a team on teamwork
and culture
and love and those kind of things is arguably difficult, but they're gonna do it. Right. So yeah, we'll see how things go. Look, is everybody instantly going to be in the best shape of their lives? No. These are still grown men that have to make their own decisions. And we've seen in the NFL, they don't always make great decisions and they fail and they succeed, right? In college, they don't have time, right? I mean, guys get in trouble, don't get me wrong, but they don't have time. They're around the program more than anything else, right? So look, it's not going to be perfect, but the people that buy in are going to buy in. They're going to be successful. It's going to work. And it might take a couple years to get to the ultimate, like, hey, we're there. I told you with Harbaugh, they almost fired him in 2020, right? It wasn't until year 7 that he beat Ohio State, right? There was marked improvement, but it took some time to get the right people. I'd argue he has the right people earlier now than he did at Michigan, which is a huge advantage, right? Yeah. And that's why there will be improvement, but it's still the NFL. And the league is built for you to be average, right? The parity is there. You have to add that little extra to get above average.
I want to finish it off with this because you kind of touched on it a little bit there, because I wanted just to get your perception on this season's expectations for the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh returning to the NFL, obviously having Jesse Minter at the helm for helming the defense. But kind of what you just said right there, I want to put it in that perspective, because people who critique Jim Harbaugh to say he's been out of the NFL for 10 years, is this going to be another John Gruden type of situation where it was out of his element for him coming back to coaching? What do you think that he has learned from that time in San Francisco to then transitioning to Michigan to winning a national championship? And as you said, the road wasn't the easiest road. It didn't just happen overnight. But what do you think that Jim Harbaugh has learned, and what do you think that he's essentially going to implement to make this team get back to where everybody feels like it should be?
I think the biggest thing is he has learned to adapt, right? He's learned that he is the 60-year-old guy who hasn't played quarterback in a very long time, right? And maybe, just maybe, some of these young coaches know some things that he doesn't, right? That was the difference. That's what changed in 2021 at Michigan. When he first got here, he did a similar thing, right? He hired Tim Drevno, and Roman would have been here too, but Roman didn't want to go back to college, right? He brought a lot of his people in and just kind of assumed it would work, and it did to a point, right? But then he hit a wall, and he made a decision in 21 to let go a lot of these older coaches. Ed Warner had been an offensive line coach for years and years, was well respected in the league, and he let Ed Warner go, and people couldn't believe it. One of the best offensive line coaches in college football, and he replaced him with a tight end coach from Central Michigan. What in the world are you thinking? That guy was Sharon Moore, and they won the Joe Moore Award for best offensive line in college football that year and the next, right? On defense, Don Brown, who was recommended to him by Bill Belichick, had the best defense in the country at Boston College before coming to Michigan, had all these great defenses, but just couldn't get over the edge against Ohio State. And he goes and gets some dude his brother recommended, the linebacker coach from the Ravens. What? Mike McDonald, now the head coach at the Seahawks. McDonald goes, and you're going to go hire the guy at Vanderbilt who was terrible at Vanderbilt for a year, another young dude that your brother recommended, Jesse Minter, right? Even Ben Herbert, some people were like, oh, he was at Arkansas, and people don't seem mad that he left, right? So, like,
he's listening.
Yeah. So, and he's willing to find a community of minds to come up with the best scheme, right? The reason Minter and Klink works, look, Klink had aspirations to be a defensive coordinator. Klink put in a lot more time than Minter did. He could probably be pretty ticked off that Minter's career ascension has gone ahead of him, and he followed him to LA to be his DB coach, right? Because Jesse Minter trusts Klink to be the defensive coordinator of the corners, if you will.
And
right?
arguably probably will be the defensive coordinator when Jesse Mitchell becomes a head coach.
Probably, right? And on offense, I know people freaked out about the Greg Roman edition and whatever, but like, you're going to see everybody on offense bring in something, right? The fundamental of the offense and under Jim Harbaugh and running the football, possessing the football, not turning it over, whatever, but there's different ways to get there. I think I talked about with Michigan. Sherrone Moore played offensive line at Alabama when Adrian Peterson was there. You saw elements of that in Michigan's run game. Mike Hart was the running back coach, was a running back at Michigan. You saw the way he ran the ball. You could see these things tangibly in the players where these position coaches had a huge input. And of course, they love that if you're a coach where you're being included in that conversation. So look, their over-under is literally 8.5, isn't it? Dead center.
Depending on which one you're looking at. But yeah, I've seen 8.5. I've seen 9. I've seen 9.5 as well. Right.
So, and look, football's a crapshoot. Right. Injuries are obviously a big piece of it. But being projected to go in the middle, I would expect they're going to win more than they lose, I think. And the reason I think that turnover can be, or that change can be quick in San Francisco, I'm going to look it up so I don't lie. 6-10 the year before he got there, 13-3 got to the NFC Championship the next.
It's a quick fix.
Right. Michigan was 5-7 the year before he got here, 10-2, had a chance to compete for the Big Ten Championship. That's because the players weren't bad, and that's the biggest thing you could probably take away from this. The players weren't bad, right? They were in a place where they were sad because losing sucks, and they had a coaching staff that didn't know what they were doing and was leading them the wrong way, and they weren't having fun, right? Losing is toxic, winning is too, right? And that's why you can see a quick change. So he's coming to a team that has Justin Herbert on it, who has now 2 really, really good tackles, right? Who's added a stable of running backs, wide receivers. I know people, I told you, they don't value Malik Neighbors.
We should have listened to you more on that. We should have listened to you more on that.
He saw what Quentin Johnston did to Michigan in 2022. If anybody can revigorate, or whatever word you want to use, I promise you Jim Harbaugh's hyping that kid up, man. There's nothing Jim Harbaugh loves more than players that he's seen do big things against him. Right? So,
oh my gosh. And the thing is,
the pieces are there.
It's pretty few and far between of players that do well against them.
Right.
And you mentioned that part, and I think that's probably what gives us and probably a lot of Chargers fans at least more hope is the volume and the brain trust that has come into this coaching staff, which that just wasn't there before. And Jim Harbaugh talked about many times, like listening to the experts, and he might not know everything, but he knows people who does, sort of thing. And that's important.
You brought up John Gruden. Gruden thought he was the expert.
And that's a big difference. And when
Urban Meyer failed in the NFL because Urban Meyer thought he was the expert.
And I do think, and this isn't to throw shade at the previous regime, but I think that there were some elements of this previous head coach, Brandon Staley, trying to fix everything on his own. Yep. And maybe that was because of the lack of people around him. Maybe that was because of ego. Maybe that was because of desperate. I don't know. But it's very clear this is like a group think, everyone in this together, all working towards creating something special. And I think that's what has Chargers fans and the players so excited for this team and this era of Chargers football. So what do you expect from this Chargers team this year? Like, they won 5 games last year.
Yeah.
Like, should Chargers fans be like Super Bowl or bust? Should Chargers fans be like, give me a playoff win and it's a success? What's your barometer of success year 1 for this team?
I think the first thing you have to do is measure success in terms of what you see on the field, right? Before you get to wins and losses, everything we've been talking about on this show, is it tangibly visible for me on the field? Am I seeing the block disruption? Am I seeing the communication? Am I seeing the effort? Even if they lose games, are they fighting until the very end? Right? Is the foundation of what will ultimately be Super Bowl or bust there? Is it real? Can I buy into it? Right? I know I'm here for Michigan, right? Comparison, but I bring up Campbell and the Lions a lot because I think that's really similar in the sense of how it's built. And look, the whiz kid turned head coach like Staley, that works if they surround themselves with other whiz kid people they can trust and then stop being that person. Or, God, I do not mean this as a shot at him. You need to have an otherworldly personality. You need to be a character. You need to be Mike McDaniel.
Yeah.
In Miami, right? Like that. And those people that come from the Shanahan coaching trees or the McVay coaching trees, the reason those guys are successful is because they keep having people hired underneath them and they keep bringing in more people and they keep going out. Having those people promoted and hired to other jobs is a great sign of success. Who was being stolen from the Chargers when he was here? Right? So Harbaugh has these people here. They probably won't be here long. And then the next guys will come in and it's just that wave, right? But in Detroit, I think it was 2-6, or I don't remember what the record got to at one point, but like Dan Campbell's on a hot seat. This is not working with the Lions. And then they go on this strong finish to end the year.
That game against Green Bay at the end, yeah.
Right? When nothing else mattered, right? That effort was there. But even the games they lost, as frustrating as it was, they were losing very these close games. They were very close, and they were down to the last little bit. They were figuring out things about themselves, right? Figuring out that identity of when to take risks and not. And then it's like, once you win that first one, that breakthrough, it just explodes, right? So like a game where they beat the Chiefs or just do something where it's like, whoa, they can build on that, and they will, and they're smart. They grab onto things like that and build. So look, I don't know what wins and losses are going to be because obviously injuries depend. I would expect you to win more than not. I think you want to be in playoff contention. You want to win games you're not supposed to, ideally, right? But before the wins and losses, like I said, seeing those pieces, just look, you saw what you saw last year. If it's not that, good. Maybe it'll take another year or two if the wins and losses don't get there. But man, if I see the effort and I see the buy-in, maybe they need to go get more players. Maybe they don't have all the right players here yet. Good. Let those guys get exposed. Let's find out they don't fit. That's another thing. You see somebody fail in a way that's like they're not going to work here. Good. You learn.
You'd rather know. Yeah.
You learn something. Absolutely. And they might be successful somewhere else. Whatever.
The great Trevor McCue joining us on Chargers Unleashed. See, this is what I needed to hear at this point in time. We're at this doldrum of the year with football, and it's just non-existent, and we're slowly starting to creep back into it now. Trevor, thank you so much for coming on, man. Always bringing it every single time. Everybody should just have basically a clipboard and the 4 pillars written down and watch if you see them on Sundays from the Chargers. Just say, check, 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 check.
I will be quizzing you next time as well. So
thank you. Appreciate
I'm going to ace that quiz next time. I'm telling you.
You had a slide, you clown.
I know.
You had the answers, and you still
open book test, and I didn't even know it.
Good Lord. Right there. It was right Literally. There. Block destruction, shocking effort, ball disruption, and obnoxious communications. That's Jesse Midget's pillar, but also Trevor McCue's pillar. And we love you for it. Trevor, thank you so much for joining us, dude. This has been so much fun.
Thanks, guys.
We'll have you on here soon. And once we see this team go crazy, and hey, if they win a Super Bowl, we're about to go nuts. And we're bringing you're a Chargers fan too, by proxy.
I'm the powder blue is making its way. I don't have it right now, but yeah.
Yes, I love the fact we went from red on my side, and then we got like the kind of red, orangish black on the middle, over to black on Jake's side. It's just like perfect transitions.
I reflect the color of my soul. What can I say?
Good Lord. All right, we're going to add that positivity for Trevor McCue, Jake Hefner. I'm Dan Wolkenstein. This is Chargers Unleashed. We'll talk to you next time.